Why don't you start off with telling me a little bit about yourself? I know you're the author of one of the novels, but I'm guessing that you're the author of more than one.
As of now, we've got the one that Sony just posted. There's another one that I've done that's already with them, and they've just contracted me for a third. So they're all short novels, sort of 20,000 words or so. Mm-hmm. And then I also have a full-length novel coming out at the end of this month, completely different genre.
Oh, and what genre is that?
The little-known World War II vampire fighter pilot. So
that does sound pretty unique.
It's a niche, I'll be honest. Yeah. So that's called Wrathful Skies. That comes out 30th of September.
And if anybody wants to, they can go to your website and find out how to...
Yeah, robertlassen.com has all the details. There's first 4 chapters free to read on the website, and then when I get time, I try and update the site and throw news up, and same on Facebook. But it's been a busy few months. I won't lie to you.
That's good. So you're writing a novel for an MMO. Does that mean you play MMOs? Do you play any video games?
Not as much as you think. I'm in the Air Force. That's my day job. Have been for 11 years. It's been a fairly busy 11 years. So honestly, I used to love playing a lot of video games. I still occasionally get the chance, but very little between Air Force, writing, family commitments, and so on. I thought when I went to SOE Live, I was completely blown away by EQ Next. And started thinking, right, time to change my life and start playing video games again. But how the powers that be will take that, I don't know. It's going to be difficult to find the time, but I live in hope, let's say.
Yeah. So when you're writing an MMO, what is your sort of creative process for writing an MMO? When you're writing for the story, I'm guessing that they give you a little overview, but do you have a specific creative process that you go through for writing in general, for writing your other novel?
Yeah. Now for the Fall of Bastion, there was a very definite. Okay, this is where your story is going to fit into the world. Here's your start point, here's your end point, here's the name of your main character. And that was about it. It was very, very flexible. There was a lot of opportunity for me to then put my own slant on how we got from A to B. I could take it any route I liked, as long as it stuck within the overall arc of the game and the world and the lore. So that had a very definite beginning and end. The story I've subsequently done, which will be, I think they're looking to release it around about January time, is much more of a, okay, here's roughly when we want it to take place. Mm-hmm. Go for it. So there was even more creative flexibility for me in the second one. So it's really interesting because you have a very loose set of directions of how you're going to do the story, what's actually going to happen. Mm-hmm. But then you have a huge amount of history and background and races and terrain and all that sort of stuff. That is all there, and it's a question of taking the story you want to tell and kind of squeezing it between all the constraints, without them ever really feeling like constraints, if you follow me. It's a very interesting way to do it, certainly compared to when you're creating something from scratch and you've got complete creative control. So
you're a new author, so you haven't worked with people who already have an established IP, and they want you to write a story in their IP. This is the first time you've done that?
Yes. Yeah, completely. My Wrathful Skies, for example, is historical to a point. Obviously, it has vampires in it.
Right.
But other than the vampire side, it's historical. So that has its own constraints. You're trying to tell a story in the margins of a very well-known story, i.e. World War II.
Right. So that
that had a similar set up that you couldn't just create something completely out there. But certainly with the EQ Next stuff, it was much more, because they were telling you this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. But don't get me wrong, it didn't feel constraining. It was actually really, really good to work in that kind of environment and have all that knowledge and all that the background and so on to actually work with, instead of having to think of it for yourself in the first place.
Okay. So do you have any favorite authors? Do you have any artists that you look to as like your inspiration?
Yes. Not necessarily inspiration. I mean, when I was sort of 16, 17, I was hugely into David Eddings.
Yeah, awesome. He is my favorite. I have my Bulgariad and my Mallorean up on top of my desk right up here.
Well, it was strange because the Bulgariad, and still I can pick that up and read it now, and still be blown away by how good it is and how good the characters are and how much I care. But then it almost seemed like every other series he did was
right
the same series, just repeated. So I drifted away, and the last few he did, the Bulgarith the Sorcerer and so on, I never actually read them.
I have read both of them, and they're good because they're the same, because there's so much history in the Bulgariad and the Mallorean that when you hear Belgarath's story, he doesn't talk about the books that you've already read. He talks about the stories that they tell in the books that you've already read. He gives a full first-hand account of what happens.
I should probably try them sometime. And as I say, the Bulgarian are just still one series.
Yeah, in between being in the Air Force and writing your own novels.
Yeah. There's time is not enough of it ever.
Mm-hmm.
But then other big, like the Wheel of Time, I made the mistake of going back and thinking when I bought the new one and I had the last one on pre-delivery. And about 2 days before it was released, I thought, I'll go back and read them all just to bring myself back up to speed. And I've just got back to Towers of Midnight, so I still haven't read it. Having ordered it months in advance and received it the day it came out, I still haven't read it because I'm working my way back through.
Mm-hmm.
But they're very good. Neil Gaiman, I'm a big fan of.
So you're writing a vampire novel, or you finished the vampire novel. Do you have a favorite vampire author?
Strange though this may sound, I'm not a huge vampires fan. I don't really read vampire books. I know that sounds very odd. I approached Wrathful Skies there were two separate stories I was interested in telling, and one was just a purely historical World War II fighter pilot story. And the other was this idea of, well, what if vampires were real, but existed in secret files and stuff like that, and weren't in the public eye. And then I ended up combining the two. But it was never because I felt some great compelling desire to go out and write a vampire story. But I realized I had what I thought was a very interesting take on the genre, and went for it. So hopefully people will agree that it was an interesting take on it.
Mm-hmm. But fantasy, it sounds like that's your go-to genre if you want to pick up a book and read for pleasure.
Yeah. Although I read a lot of stuff. I read a lot of non-fiction as well these days. If you look at people like Sebastian Junger, I love the way he writes, that ability to bounce from very kind of matter-of-fact, here's something I'm going to teach you about meteorology, to here's people about to die on a boat, and bounce between the two. And read a lot of the history as well. There's all sorts of stuff. But again, it's the problem is finding enough time. So I've got Java trying to install itself in the middle of a conversation.
Okay. So, in one of the first episodes that we ever recorded, I said that I was looking forward to reading the novels, and it's not because I didn't think that just the MMO genre was a little bit stale, because they're talking about how EverQuest Next is going to shake up the genre and introduce new ideas into it. And I said that I thought it wasn't just the the MMO games in general. I thought it was the whole fantasy genre. Right now feels a little bit stale. Like if you've been reading fantasy since like David Eddings in the early '80s, nothing really new or innovative has come out. I was going to say, do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I disagree to an extent. I think there's some incredibly original stuff out there. There's some really different takes. But I think part of what happens is the stuff that is either very successful or the stuff that makes it to screen always ends up kind of folding back into that rerun of the Lord of the Rings type setup. And the really interesting stuff, and again, a lot of it is older anyway, stuff, Michael Moorcock type stuff that existed on the fringes and had a fan base but never made it into the public consciousness. I think there's some good stuff out there, but yeah, there is that tendency for it to be the same stuff that really makes it big. Yeah, how you would make it would then seem stale because you're like, well, I'm sure I've seen this before.
Okay. So Maxwell Alexander Drake, he's kind of he's the person responsible for having all of the novels written.
He was the first person that SOE spoke to and went, you know what, if we were going to go and do this sort of thing, would you be interested? And then it led from there, and it was Drake who said to me, look, SOE are putting out the feelers, would you like to submit an audition piece? And Drake and I were the same publishing house. So I then submitted my audition piece based on his suggestion that I do so. And he's now becoming increasingly involved in it as well. So he's definitely the lead person in the project, something of a mentor to me, if I can sound a bit feeble. I don't know. I'm sure he would be distraught to hear himself described as a mentor, but we did a lot of work together. The two stories, the Last Son of the Teardal and the Full of Bastion, we did an awful lot of the writing process together. Not the actual sitting down and writing, but the plotting out and how they were going to link together. My writing now, the stuff I've been doing for SOE, is the best stuff I've ever written.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and in fact, my absolute favourite thing I've ever written was my audition piece, because I only had 2,000 words, and you just can't afford to waste any. Mm-hmm. So that was something I thought I was really happy with, and a lot of that in the last 2 or 3 years, I just think I've come on hugely as a writer. And a lot of that is down to Drake's influence and his ability to say, "Hey, this is good, but it could be so much better if you did A, B, and C." Mm-hmm. So I'm very grateful to him. He's been a very good influence on me.
Yeah. So I didn't know that you were active duty in the Air Force. Do you mind if I ask you about your educational background? Did you English major or anything like that, or just a fan of writing?
I never really. I studied English literature and stuff up to 18, but I was an international politics major. My interests academically always tend to be in history and that sort of thing. But I started writing fiction when I was 7 or 8.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why Tolkien started writing too. He was really interested in history, and it lent to his stories.
Yeah, and obviously, something like Wrathful Skies, that's very, very clear that my interest in source is right there. But I still have stories I wrote when I was 8 or 9. It's kind of strange now. I read my stories I wrote when I was 8 to my 6-year-old son. And then I realized that I was a very strange 8-year-old. There's a lot of violence and scorpions and bad juju in my 8-year-old writing.